All right, welcome back. This is going to be our last talk about what I'm calling Mesopotamian civilization. And we're going to be looking at the years between the fall of the Akkadian Empire and the rise of the Persian Empire, focusing in Mesopotamia and specifically through the lens of the rivalry between these two nations, states. I guess I should call them empires of Babylon and Assyria. So what you're going to see is that a lot of the things that we've already discussed with regard to Sumerian civilization, don't really change during this time period. You have different cities, even different conquering outsiders who come in and take over this region, but not a lot really changes culturally or even with regard to social structures. So you'll see that they still worship the same pantheon of gods, even though some might emphasize the worship of one god over another. They still write using cuneiform. They still build their ziggurats. Their aesthetics largely haven't changed. So whether it's insiders or outsiders who come to rule, basing their headquarters in, let's say, Babylon or Assyria, the culture doesn't change. And what you see is that instead of the outsiders coming in and warping the land into their image, the land rather warps them and assimilates them into its own image. This is something that we see thematically repeated throughout history. You can think of even Genghis Khan when his army takes over China. In the years after his death, they don't change the Chinese nation state into the image of the Mongolian horde, but rather the descendants of Genghis Khan, they become the same type of autocratic, bureaucratic state actors that the Chinese had already been. So land and city-states do have power over generations, and I should really say this: cultures have power over generations to change people into their own image, and they are persistently reluctant to being changed. So after the fall of the Akkadian Empire, you do have a little bit of a dark age, but then around the year 1900 or 1950 BC, we have the rise of a man, one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known names in all of ancient Mesopotamian history, and this is Hammurabi. Hammurabi is a leader of an Amoritish clan. The Amorites are people from outside of Mesopotamia, a little bit further to the west and southwest in the Syrian desert. The Amorites move in and they take over Babylon. They set up shop in Babylon, and they wind up exerting their influence over the area. So again, you see ziggurats, you see the same pantheon of gods, but one of the distinctives of the ancient Babylonians, what we're going to call the old Babylonian Empire, you'll see why later, is the emphasis of the worship of the god Marduk. So their creation narrative is a little bit different than the standard Mesopotamian or Sumerian creation narrative. It's a little bit more detailed in that you have this chaos dragon, this female god of the salt waters, demon dragon thing that you see here in the middle called Tiamat. And Tiamat captures and is oppressing the pantheon of gods, but then over here to the left we see the entrance of a new god, or at least new with regard to our perspective, and his name is Marduk. And Marduk has weapons of war, and he speaks magic words, and he has eyes all around his head, and so he's able to both through perspective and through power of speech and through power of deed, he's able to conquer Tiamat, kill Tiamat, and free the gods. And he takes Tiamat and divides her up and uses her body parts to create the different topographical structures of the land, the mountains and the seas and the rivers and the deserts and all those sorts of things. So again, you see that this is a little bit different of a narrative, and you also see that because of this, Hammurabi and others would say that Marduk is worthy of worship because of his accomplishments in the cosmological realm, and that his name and his fame are deserving of being spread throughout the region, throughout the land. And his sense of justice is also supposed to be propagated, and we see that nowhere more clearly than in the stele of Hammurabi. This image here over to the left is a structure about 7.5 feet tall called the Stele of Hammurabi, which contains on it the Code of Hammurabi. You cannot really see it at this definition, but everything underneath the image of these two, this Hammurabi and then the god of the sun who's giving him this code of justice in a scroll, you see that there's these tiny cuneiform writings, and they are the code of justice. This has everything to do with taxation and marriage and murder and just the penalties for certain crimes, how state structures are supposed to be set up. This is the first instance that we see of the now famous phrase, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And this is considered pretty fair, especially by the standards of the day. It's also very functional. It's so functional, in fact, that even after the Amorites wind up falling and you have the city of Babylon sacked and other people are going to be governing the region, when Babylon is in charge, this same legal structure is going to be used by other ethnic groups that come in and rule the place, by other people groups that exercise dominion. They're not going to depart far from this code of Hammurabi. Eventually, however, the Amorites, the Babylonians, let me just talk about that for a second. So ethnically, they're Amoritish. They're a Semitic people group. They speak a Semitic language. However, we call them Babylonians not because that's where they originate, but because that's where they set up their headquarters. So they come in from the west, from the Syrian desert. They populate the region, and they rule the region from the seat of power of Babylon. And so Babylon functions as the seat of power, but it's not like these are indigenous Sumerians or Akkadians. These are people who are coming in from the outside. Eventually, they are kind of softened up, like we see all throughout history, and we always will. The empire that Hammurabi sets up, his descendants are not able to rule with the same force of will and the same structure that he is. And so we see a group of people here from the southeast, the Elamites, notorious, brutal, warfaring people. They are also a city-state dwelling people, and they come in and they sack the city of Babylon. And it's really at that point when we consider the old Babylonian Empire to have fallen. But the Elamites don't move in. They carry certain treasures home with them as a semblance of victory and as a semblance of the fact that they've taken over, or that they've defeated the Babylonians, that their gods are superior to the Babylonian gods, superior to Marduk. But the next people who wind up coming in and ruling this place are actually another group of people from the Zagros Mountains, a group of outsiders, barbarians, we might call them, called the Kassites. And you see that they kind of sweep in also from here to the east, and they move in, they take over Babylon, and they rule roughly the same empire as the Amorites had from roughly the same seat of power. But we do see the emergence of one of these city-states, Assur, that resists being ruled, and they instead decide that they're going to create their own domain, their own empire. They're going to they were already a rebellious people, but now they resist. They say, we've bowed the knee to the Amoritish Babylonians. We're not going to bow the knee to the Kassite Babylonians. And so they set up their own sphere of influence over here to the north, a little bit further upriver in the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Mesopotamia. We see these other city-states that did exist, and we'll talk about them a little bit more throughout future lessons, but the Mycenaean Greeks, the Hittites, and then the Egyptians also exist at this time. This would be about the 13th century before Christ, and we see that there's an emergence of a power struggle, a rivalry between Assyria and Babylon that very much could come to dominate these next couple of centuries if it were not for the incredibly disruptive influence of the next major historical event, which is the Bronze Age collapse. So all of these empires would be called Bronze Age empires. We're living in the Bronze Age, where the smelting and use of bronze tools is the most impactful economic and warfare structure available to these states. There are a group of people, they just go by the names the Sea Peoples, and we don't really know where they come from. A lot of people think that they come either from the Apennine Peninsula, Sicily, Sardinia, or even other places further west in the Mediterranean. They come from the western part of the Mediterranean. They're, I guess, kind of like Vikings, but they're also talked about as not just warfaring people, but also refugees. So they come in and they disrupt and they wound, and in several cases they destroy the social structures, and they move in. So the Mycenaean Greeks are taken down by the Sea Peoples. There are still Greek people there. They will see a comeback, but the Mycenaean phase of Greek history is done after this. With Egypt and with the Hittites, we see that the Egyptians are taken down. Egypt is not going to be run by Egyptians after this point. It will see itself established again as a domain for largely other empires, but it will not really have the type of pride of place among the ancient empires that it had before that. And then we also see the Hittite Empire, which is sacked. It is diminished. So there's still a Hittite culture. There's still an Egyptian culture, a Greek culture, people worshiping the same gods, writing with the same scripts, speaking the same languages, even having the same some of the same social structures, but in a greatly diminished capacity. So the Hittite Empire never recovers from this either. This disrupts the bronze trade. Remember, in order to make bronze, you've got to acquire both tin and copper from separate locations, bring them together at the same location, and smelt them into bronze. And there are some civilizations that never recover from this. They're completely dead. It's not like they see a renaissance hundreds of years after, in the future, after a dark age. For example, the Ugaritic culture, they're just done after this. We never hear from or see them again. So the sea peoples, these kind of Viking refugee nomads, whatever it is that you want to call them, they move in, they destroy, they disrupt, and they wind up completely diminishing these Bronze Age set of empires. And so really we're going to enter into a dark age before the next metallic age, which is the Iron Age. And over here in the Hittite, what used to be the Hittite Empire now is just like the Hittite region populated by people who worship the Hittite pantheon of gods and speak the Hittite languages. The Hittites are the first people who figure out in this dark age or in this period between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, they're the first people who figure out how to use iron extensively. Iron is convenient because it is an element, so it's not an alloy of two metals. You can just find an iron mine and you can start to create iron tools, but it is harder to manufacture in the sense that you need to be able to heat your smelting furnaces far hotter in order to smelt iron than you would have needed in order to smelt bronze. And so the Hittite people see a little bit of a resurgence, but still they're never going to rise to power. They're never going to rise back to their same influence that they had during the Bronze Age. But this tool, this technique, is used by later empires. Most notably, we see the Assyrians. Remember the Assyrian people who had been a rebellious people even during the Amoritish and Kassite rule of Babylon. The Assyrians are from Assyria. They are from Assur. They are from Nineveh. They're from the upper upper Tigris and Euphrates, further up the rivers away from the Persian Gulf, a little bit more to the northwest. They worship the god Asur, or Asher, and he is a god who is worthy not because of his cosmological importance, but because he is strong and he is a warrior, a god of war, and he is seen as worthy and important because he can do what he wants. And we see here, I think, a beginning and an interesting beginning of the debate between political realism and political idealism, whereas with Babylon, it doesn't really matter who rules, whether it's Kassites, Amorites, later we'll see Chaldeans. Babylon is a set of ideas. Babylon is the Code of Hammurabi. It is the worship of Marduk, and really anybody can come in and oversee that as long as they're abiding by the same structures. But with Assyria, it's like, no, we are Assyrians, we are native Mesopotamians, we worship a god who is worthy because he can kill you and we can kill you. And the Assyrians, I like to think of as the first proper empire. An empire is when a group of people conquers and rules over people who are not like them. And sure, the Akkadians were able to rule over the Sumerians who spoke a different language, but culturally, religiously, They are largely the same people. They are Mesopotamian peoples, and I don't want to discount the differences between them. They certainly would have seemed strange to each other, but the Assyrians conquer and rule over people who are as diverse as monotheistic Israelites, as the Egyptians, as diverse as the Egyptians, who are polytheistic, but they worship a completely different pantheon of gods. They write using hieroglyphics, not cuneiform, and they are a people who are linguistically, religiously, ethnically, culturally, totally alien to the Assyrians. So the Assyrians set up their capitals in Nineveh and in Assur, and in Nineveh they set up also the world's first library. This is overseen by the man who may have been the first literate king in history, which is a man named Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal does not expect to become king. He expects to become more of a scribe or a regent, and so he teaches himself, or he is taught rather, in one of those edubas. He is taught to read and write, and so the importance of literacy spreads throughout the Assyrian Empire, and I think that's kind of funny, personally, to think that the Assyrians are known for a couple things. One is the importance of literacy, and two is their absolute emphasis on brutal warfare. I think of the Assyrians as really the first Nazis. They use these iron tools to vastly improve their heavy infantry, their charioteers. Horses have also been bred sufficiently to the point where they're able to pull chariots. We see this man equipped in the upper left with iron weapons instead of bronze. We see a chariot that is pulled by 4 horses and is also strong enough now to carry 4 people. You have a driver, a couple of defenders, and an archer that is mounted. So you have a mounted turret, a mounted platform from which people can shoot, and this is devastating. These chariots were thought of as being virtually unstoppable on the ancient Mesopotamian battlefield. And when they rolled up on your city, you really had a couple options. I mean, you could leave or you could fight and die, because the Assyrians were going to move in, they were going to conquer, and we see from some of their own art, you see these men being led around by nose rings, and one of them being blinded by an Assyrian official. We see the heads of conquered people being collected and tallied here by some of the Assyrian soldiers, and they're also noted for their practice of what we might later come to call crucifixion, not crucifying men on a cross, as we think of Jesus on the cross or anything like that, but rather lifting their hands above them and driving a spike between the wrist bones, or rather the forearm bones, the radius and ulna of both the right and left arm, and just hanging them there, suspending them there, in most cases still alive. And imagine riding your donkey up into the city of Nineveh, and the streets on the way there are just lined with these bodies of people who had tried to resist, or who had committed crimes or insurrection or theft or things like that. This would be a harsh and clear symbol that the Assyrians don't mess around when it comes to law and order, when it comes to the when it comes to their desire to rule with an iron fist the people who they have conquered. And the Assyrians also kind of fall into the pattern of becoming, I don't want to say decadent in their case, but kind of drunk with success. And the only way, I mean, they have a reputation for being invincible, for being cruel. The Bible has pretty much only negative and harsh things to say about Assyria. But the only way that they're able to be brought down is that we have this rebellious little state of Babylon. So just as Assyria had resisted against Babylonian rule, now Babylon resists Assyrian rule. And you have a king, Nabopolassar, who hires Median mercenaries. These would be like horseback archers from the steppe a little bit further to the north and east. So you think of the land that we would call Iran, or the Zagros Mountains. He makes an alliance with the Medes. The Medes come in, and they are far quicker than the Assyrians. So it seems that the only way that you're able to defeat an archer in a chariot is with an archer just straight on horseback. And this is an entire culture. I could speak at length. I will talk at length over the course of these lessons about the culture of the horseback archers. These are people who we would later call the Mongols or the Huns. These are the Medes, these are Scythians. They go by a lot of different names, but it's a completely different type of civilization to itself. And in some instances, we hear about these people literally learning to ride a horse before they can walk, learning to shoot with deadly accuracy while mounted on horseback. So now, instead of 4 horses pulling one chariot with 4 men and only one of them is shooting, now you can have a man just straight on horseback. You don't need to manufacture chariots at this point. And through Babylon's alliance with these Medes, they're able to soften and ultimately take down the Assyrian Empire, and this is where we see the birth of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So we saw the old Babylonian Empire under Hammurabi. The Neo-Babylonian Empire is best known from its rule from Nebuchadnezzar. This is a very short-lived empire. It lasts about 70 years. However, it is very well known largely because of its emphasis in the Bible. And I, having taught history for over a decade now, when I think of the Middle East or when I think of ancient Mesopotamia, I don't think of necessarily Sargon of Akkad, or I don't think of the Kassites. I think of these people who are the Chaldeans, who move in, set up their headquarters in Babylon, and rule it from there. And I think of Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar, largely because when I was a child, I was brought up on these stories from the book of Daniel and just from the Christian Old Testament. We see here a period of flourishing, even if it is a short-lived empire. They are very wealthy. Babylon is used as a symbol of wealth and decadence, and perhaps that might be why they're so short-lived. But a lot of stories in the Bible, remember that the Bible with an emphasis on on the Hebrew people, the Israelites, specifically the tribe of Judah, later in its chronology, they turned to idols, and as punishment for the Israelite people turning away from their God, God sends the Babylonians to destroy the city of Jerusalem, destroy the temple that had been built by King Solomon, and to take many, many of these people captive into Babylon. Notably among them you have Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The story of the 3 Hebrew children in the fiery furnace, the prophecies of Daniel all take place from a perspective of people who had been born in Judah, who had been sacked and taken captive by the Babylonians, and then who were living in exile from their homeland in a foreign empire, in the land of Babylon. And famously in Daniel we have the 2 dreams, the dream of the statue that has the head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, the hips of bronze, and then the legs of iron, and also the 4 beasts, which would be the winged lion, the bear who limps on one side with the 3 ribs in its mouth, the 4-headed and 4-winged leopard, and then just this great beast, this great monster, this 10-horned monster. And these dreams, these symbols, are supposed to tell us about the 4 different empires that are going to rule over Jerusalem before the rock, before the Christ comes and sets up his kingdom there. So you have the golden head and the winged lion. These would be Babylonian, or I honestly think of them as just symbols of Mesopotamian culture and civilization. The chest and arms of silver, as well as the bear. These would be symbols of what we'll talk about next, which would be the Persians who move in. The hips of bronze, aka the 4-headed and 4-winged leopard. These are the Greeks or the Macedonians. I think of the empire of Alexander the Great that swept in so swiftly, defeated the Persians, and then was quickly divided up into 4 regions. And then we also have the legs of iron, and also the 10-horned beast. You can think of the Roman Empire being the last Gentile empire to set up its shop there before Christ comes and inaugurates his kingdom. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that when we focus on Israeli history, and then the histories of these other empires. So regardless of who's in charge, whether it is the Akkadians or the Amorites ruling from Babylon, or the Assyrians, or the Chaldeans or Kassites ruling also from Babylon, we see that these are all Mesopotamian empires with a Mesopotamian culture, Mesopotamian pantheon, languages that would have originated in and around the area. And so this is really the end of the region having any sort of autonomy, or the center of power being located somewhere in Mesopotamia. And from this point forward, they're going to be conquered by the Persians and other outsiders and kind of ruled from an outside perspective. But that's our lesson. We'll get more into those in the next lesson. Hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you for tuning in. God bless, and have a great day.